Today, I wanted to talk about the contracting process, also known as the procurement process. And I want to, of course, talk about it from the vantage point of the federal government. But before I, talk about it from the federal government's vantage point, I want to say that just like the federal government buys, the state governments buy as well as local and municipal governments. The reason why these government entities buy is because they're supporting their own function, right? They're supporting the function of government, and that function then, carries over to taking care of the cities and the people that those governments manage, if you will, and that those people live in those cities, so they fall under certain government's rule, and so these entities buy goods and services on their own behalf. And on behalf of the employees that support them. And so that's the whole reason why, like DOD or, the Border Patrol, as an example, this is why they buy, because they're supporting their own effort, if you will. Now, what happens is that someone in the organization, let's use DOD, I'm DOD based, you have an end user. So that end user has a requirement. And what they do is they submit a purchase request basically to the contracting office. And basically they state, what it is that they're trying to buy. They give you a description, how many, the cost. They give you all of the information that they've gained in their market research. And they basically need to have a recommended source of supply. So most all contracting offices I'm aware of, you are required to have a recommended source of supply on your purchase request. I mean, because part of that is that's at least one vendor, one contractor that we know can do the work. And that's where the starting point, begins when you start talking about market research. That recommended source is validated, and then the contracting officer goes out and tries to find, one or two more sources at least to have a fair competition in that requirement. So that purchase request is sent up to the contracting office. And of course, not only does it has the requirement on it, but the end user must also make sure that they put the appropriate funding on that purchase document. So the amount of funding that basically is needed to procure what it is that they want. So once the purchase request gets funding attached, right, and so we have the money, we have the need, then it goes to the contracting office. What the contracting office is going to do is, basically this is a kind of a straight line process, if you will. Obviously, there's always can be some variance, but generally speaking, they're going to take that requirement and they're going to screen it for a small business set aside. They're going to check to see if there's some way, shape, or form, or how possible that they can give this to some type of a small business entity. And they're going to do that through market research. Market research being they're going to search the small businesses, dynamic small business web search. They may check GSA. They may check their previous files, previous history from previous procurements, and just their own market research. Maybe the end user, all right, the customer, the person that's ordering these items, maybe they provided some additional information to the contracting office that will be helpful in market research and determining if we can do a small business set aside, and if we can further set aside for one of the small business set aside programs, such as service disabled, veteran-owned small business program, woman-owned small business program, 8A hub zone, things of that nature. Now, the contracting officer, what they're going to do is they're going to put out a synopsis or a solicitation, depending on the dollar value of the requirement. If it's a fairly large value, they'll synopsize it first, or they'll do what's called a combined synopsis solicitation, where they're actually synopsizing it and they're doing the solicitation kind of at once. That particular step, when they do that, that can save the government anywhere from 15 to 30 days, even 45 days, depending on the rule sets of posting of requirements that that agency has to follow. And so in this case, if they're doing a combined synopsis solicitation, that document may be out there for anywhere from 21 to 45 days, 60 days, 3 months. You just never know. Sometimes only 10 days, which some of the dollar values are the ones that are 10 days. I question. I get the smaller dollar values, but we definitely need to have some time on these so that industry can do their due diligence to make sure that they can provide a good response and a good product back or a service back. So that solicitation is out posted. What ends up happening is, like I just said, industry and small businesses will bid on that solicitation. They'll submit their proposals back. So there will be an RFQ or an RFP or something like that, and they'll submit their response back. The government, the contracting office, and the technical team, they will hold a source selection evaluation board, and they will determine who the winner is based on the evaluation factors that they provided in the solicitation. They're going to give you some information in section L and or instructions to offers, which is a clause. And they're also going to give you information in section M and or evaluation factors, which is also in clause. Those two key places in your solicitation will tell you how they're going to evaluate that requirement. So it's very important. So those, on the back end of this, if you will, if you are responding to these solicitations, it's very important that you're looking at, well, what exactly are they going to be grading on? That way you can spend the preponderance of your time and the preponderance of your response in the areas that the government is most looking for. And then, because most times we have a time crunch. So as you're, managing your time, make sure you're spending the bulk of your time answering the questions based on section L and section M, or instructions to offers, evaluation factors. And then you can spend time, of course, on the remainder of your proposal or quote. Once that happens, once again, you submit it, the government grades it, they determine a winner. Once they determine a winner, they generally notify that company ahead of time to give them like a phone call or something. They kind of start the process behind the scenes, even though nothing has been signed, but they start that process. And then while that is happening, they then start to begin to, the process of gathering their information so they can notify the unsuccessful offers, however that may be. Most times it probably is going to be an email. If it's a more formal requirement, they're probably going to do a letter or email and letter, or a letter in an email, right? So one of the variants of those things will happen. And depending on, once again, if your requirement is a FAR Part 13 procurement or a FAR Part 15 procurement, that will determine if you can get a debrief. Well, you can always get a debrief. It just will determine how robust of a debrief you may get. Whereas, if it's FAR Part 13, they just basically tell you the basics of the requirement, very basic information. Whereas in FAR Part 15, you can get a much more robust debrief in the event that you are one of the unsuccessful offers. So today we discussed the contracting process, or the procurement process, basically from when an end user or a customer or a client of a company, and for the contracting officer, he or she is my client, they have a requirement that they send to me because I'm the business person in this relationship. And so I go out and procure those goods and services on their behalf. The gear or service comes in, my client, my customer, your customer, they receipt for the gear. And then, we put a bow on the contract at the end of the year, or at the end of the delivery, or whenever the service or the contract says it is done. All right. And this video is done. Until next time, remember, government contracting is hard, even if you know how to do it. Take care.